4. Head Dance. We are such stuff as dreams are made on. A Midsummer Night's Dream. William Shakespeare. Hemmings trudged across the lunar plain, towards where he estimated that the church had been, negotiating a crater wall that had previously been concealed as a much softer hedge. He had glanced upwards at the globe of the earth, visible now that the camouflage field had faded, but he had failed to notice the pallor which had started to spread across Europe. Walking on the moon. Good Lord, it was just as bleak, just as uncompromising as he had imagined it. The perfect setting for such a strange ritual. The place was full of epic grandeur. Nothing trivial could happen here. Ariosto had it that the moon was where everything wasted on earth was treasured. Unanswered prayers, fruitless tears, and broken vows. This was the place where wasted talent was kept in vases. The god who had engineered all this, the infinite butterfly that men had worshipped and sacrificed to throughout history, seemed to share Hemmings's sense of humour. Still, the whole thing was tiring him. Hemmings wasn't quite like other men. He woke in the morning to a strict routine, worked like a machine, rested with his paintings in the evening. Doubt, weakness and self-questioning played no part in his life. In their place was a vague vacuum that occasionally manifested itself as a sense of destiny. This life must be lived, and of course no scholar could deny Sartre's logic. But where was the meaning? Well, he had found meaning beyond individual concerns in the joy of National Socialism and the evolution of the species. Happy as an ant, Hemmings had found the concept of abduction by the gods completely acceptable. Obvious, even. The only doubt he felt, even now, was in fatigue. Had the doctor's escape from the inn meant the end of the plan? And if so, why hadn't he been spirited back to HQ? Well, he thought, climbing over the crest of a small hill, it seems not. There lay Ace, surrealistically unprotected on the altar. But where was the child priest? "Boo!" shouted a voice over his intercom. And there he was behind him, chuckling in that mock-adult way of his. The laughter annoyed Hemmings. If the boy was a servant of the gods, he was a most disrespectful one. "So there you are. Have you been told what we're supposed to be? Where's the doctor?" Hemmings sighed. He felt absurd explaining himself to the boy. "He managed to get away. I did my best, but—" He shrugged. This child wasn't his superior. Boyle was hissing, that ugly little face concealed by his helmet visor. "What? You allowed him to escape?" Hemmings' resignation flared into anger. "Yes, I did. What's it to you, you nasty little brute?" Boyle stood still, and for a moment Hemmings suspected that he had burst into tears. Then the little figure in the spacesuit gave a tiny kick, bouncing upwards to eye level. There was something strange behind his faceplate. Something... Boyle's fist shot out in a blur and connected with Hemmings. With a crack, the man's neck broke, and a blur of fluid vaporized in the vacuum. The astronaut's helmet and its contents bounced off across the dunes. The body, headless, fell to the ground. Boyle floated down and skipped across to where the head lay. He crouched and spoke down to it like a little boy would speak to a pet rabbit. The voice that spoke now was, however, female. "Because of you, I have had to waste precious energy. Locating the doctor, distracting him, interfacing him and his companion's memory with the TARDIS. I'm surprised, frankly, that it was possible. All because of your error." The child dragon hissed a sigh. "You shall continue to serve me in my kingdom, Hemmings. Perhaps there you will prove more useful." The creature that had been Boyle removed its helmet, revealing the stark features of the dragon. Then it pressed its forehead to the dead head in its grasp. The corpse's eyes rolled and blinked at the sudden stimulation. "Memory drain complete," murmured the creature, licking its lips. Then it stood and walked away. Hemmings's corpse lay in the lunar dust, empty. St. Christopher's Church flew down a butterfly corridor, through translucent purple patternings. A million shades of blue strobed around the ancient architecture. Inside, things were about as calm as could be expected. "Where the hell are we?" Emily Hutchins shouted. The exterior scene flashed through the stained glass, making the aisle look like some infernal disco. Peter was nodding excitedly, peering out like a schoolboy in a sweet shop. "A time-space corridor like Edmund hypothesized last year. But the energy required, where's it coming from? That's the question. Of course, the fact of our vanishing from the material universe will have caused a vast energy discharge. Conservation of energy, you see. That's why time travel would be impossible. At least it would be unless you could harness a black hole, somehow store up all the potential energy debt incurred and let it leak out of the event horizon as slow dollops of Hawking radiation, but that's impossible too." His wife touched him on the arm, and he looked up at her, a touch distracted. Then his face fell, and he hugged her to him. "Do you know where we are, Reverend?" asked Emily, slightly comforted. Trelaw shook his head. "I'm afraid not. Perhaps Saul can answer your questions." "Or perhaps only create more," came the choral voice from on high. "It might be a good idea to explain me first." "Ah," Trelaw nodded, picking up the gurgling baby with the squeamishness of a lifelong bachelor. "Yes, Saul has been here, or rather where we were, associated with the site, since before the first church was built. To the Celts he was a local spirit. The Saxons called him a god." "Pleased to meet you," the voice boomed. "Yes, right." Peter held out his hand, then withdrew it awkwardly in the absence of anything to shake. "But what are you?" Emily asked. "I'm not sure. Is anyone? I believe that I evolved. There's a sort of condensation of belief and worship, a focus for psychic energy. If anybody with psionic potential sets foot in here, they find themselves capable of great feats." "Maybe that explains the size of the congregation," muttered Trelaw. "We've searched for other examples and believe Saul is quite unique." "Perhaps, but the doctor said—" "The doctor?" Peter was getting lost in this esoteric double act. "An old friend. He said that if you leave anything long enough, it'll achieve intelligence. Apparently he had a pot of jam like that once." "I think that was a joke, Saul." "Oh." Trelaw looked down at his latest charge. "What do you think he was doing, rushing in and out like that with the baby?" Emily put a hand on her hips and raised a finger. Peter, who had retreated into lecture mode in an almost conscious effort to remain sane, was gratified to see her strength coming to the fore. "Wait a minute, that little Scotsman was this doctor of yours?" Trelaw looked up at the rafters and cleared his throat. "Indeed, yes. That's the bit we really don't understand yet." "And you think he's got something to do with—" Emily gestured around the church. "With what's happening?" "Ah, possibly. It's his sort of thing." "Right." Emily sat down firmly and motioned to be given the baby. "I'll want a word with him then." "So will I," muttered her husband, shaking his head. The doctor lay on the floor of the TARDIS. The column of the timecraft was rising and falling, indicating flight. If the psychic damage had been any greater, regeneration would have been in order. But that, even that, was denied him now. This was a very dangerous game. He sat up and examined his eyes in the mirror on the console, bloodshot with mental strain. After a while he stood up. The TARDIS was coming in for a landing, and he had to be ready. Time to confront the enemy. Boyle Thing stood beside the prostrate form of Ace, switched off, waiting. With a galvanised roar, the TARDIS appeared, police box shape incongruous on the lunar soil. The door opened and out stepped the Doctor, carrying only his umbrella. The creature was, for an instant, surprised. I extended the TARDIS's environment shields beyond the exterior, the Doctor growled, asking the creature's unasked question. Concern, mingling with disgust at the process that had reduced her to this vegetable state, the Doctor bent to examine Ace. Boilthing had removed its helmet, exposing the dragon visage. Doctor, we meet in the flesh. The Doctor appeared unconcerned at the creature's form, glancing upwards briefly before returning his attention to Ace. If she's suffered any permanent damage, he murmured, I'll destroy you utterly, every last molecule. You are hardly in a position to make threats, Time Lord. No. The Doctor straightened to meet the creature's gaze, his face expressionless. I'm not. Strange how situations get away from you, isn't it? Do you know me now? Have you grasped the smallest fraction of my plan? The being smiled, exposing aluminium teeth. Tell me everything. You're holding the aces now. The creature rose a few inches off the lunar surface, spreading its arms wide. The Doctor perched on the edge of the altar, leaning on his umbrella, absently stroking his companion's hair. I was Kataka, the creature began. I became Ishtar, transformed by technology into an incantation, a word of power. A computer virus, you mean, scowled the Doctor. Spare me the rhetoric. As you will. I am known to the ancients of Earth as Hell. To the Daleks I am Golian Aktana, the twister of paths. An apt name. No wonder they had trouble with time travel, with you changing the possibilities all the time. They sent a task force against me. Glorious feeding, much energy. I understand you, Doctor. I have fought your enemies. You were responsible for granting me my freedom to manipulate time. I regret that. That's why I must stop you. These are not the only names you have been given. The Time Lords have long anticipated your arrival. They call you Timewyrm. That is a name I approve of. I attempted to read the green and black books of Gallifrey, firstly by direct linkage, then by trying to return to the occasion of their composition. I was blocked by fierce temporal security and powerful temporal baffles. I could have forced my way through. I have not yet calculated the limitations of my power, but it would have proved an unnecessary drain on my resources. What do they say of the Timewyrm? The Doctor took a step closer to the small creature, his hand open in a gesture of negotiation. They say that you will devour the first and last of the Time Lords, that the Rassilon will be crushed in your jaws during the last moments of the Blue Shift, the final inrush of matter at the end of this universe. You will precipitate that event. You will bend and break continuity structures throughout the dimensions. The fabric of time-space will collapse. The causal nexus will shatter, and the laws of physics will cease to have any meaning. The Timewyrm gazed at the Doctor, its eyes burning with wonder. This is what will happen? Perhaps. These legends come from the dark times when Gallifreyans dared to examine their own future. Nothing is certain. While you exist, though, every particle of matter in the cosmos is in danger. The Doctor was desperately trying to persuade the creature of the truth of his words, frustrated by his inability to express what he foresaw. Is this what you wanted? No, but it is what I have become. The Timewyrm paused, the lines of its artificial face softening for a moment, as if struck by an ancient memory. My life is strange. You must know that even this scheme is not born of malice. Much of what I am is due to the nature of the data virus that forms my infrastructure. I am not fully Ishtar anymore, but something of destiny, something of fate. No, that is what distinguishes us from inanimate matter, Kataka. We are free. The doctor seemed surprised by the force of his own words. Fate is what we make it. We have a choice. And what is my choice? The thing that once was Ishtar almost sighed, seeming to know the answer to its own question. Only death, the doctor whispered, gazing into those scared boy-woman eyes. Sooner or later, with the universe or alone. Give back Ace. Cease this scheme, whatever it is. I will aid your passing. The Timewyrm stared at him, aghast, a small fist curled with astonishment. No, no, I can feed as I wish. I can control my appetites. You are interfering with my human form, stimulating things which are no longer present in my programming. I am too grand for your morality, too much of a force. If you say that I will destroy this cosmos through my feeding, then that is what I will do. If you say that I will pull on the threads of time until they break, then I will pull. I am your Timewyrm. The doctor stepped back, disgusted. You're a coward, a selfish child. With a roar, the Timewyrm rushed forward and let fly with its fist. Claws burst through the material of the glove as it slashed across the doctor's face. He fell, clutching his cheek. When he rose once more, he was nursing 3 parallel scars. Quietly, he put a handkerchief to them. That is the very least of what you will suffer at my hand, Doctor, rumbled the Timewyrm, visibly containing its rage. If you had ceased your crusade against me, I might have even done as you asked, let your companion go, found some other way of doing what I must to survive. Now I can see that indeed I have no option. I have learnt your methods, followed your own plans, observed your actions. Now I have used them all against you. I have your companion's memory data, her personality, her life, her self. The doctor stood up, looking the Timewyrm in the eye. Show her mercy at least. Put her back in her body. I'll negotiate. Oh, yes, laughed the worm. Of course you will, but only while I hold her in my power. I refuse to underestimate you, Doctor. What do you want from me? I'll tell you that later. First, you have to follow Dorothy. The doctor brought his face closer to the grinning monster, seeing his blood reflected in its cold blue brow. Her name, he growled, is Ace. At the moment, the creature smiled back, that depends entirely on me. I have already tricked her into something, but no, I refuse to show you too much of my hand. I will meet you here in an hour. A vague shimmering noise was already rippling the atmosphere of the TARDIS's exterior environment bubble. Then you can go and visit her. In the meantime, you'd best look after your guests. And with that, the Timewyrm hopped away, vanishing over the crest of a lunar hill. The doctor gazed after her. Remember, he said softly, that I offered you a mercy. He looked down at his companion once more and removed a speck of dirt from her brow. Forgive me, the doctor whispered. With a roar of distorting space-time, a large object shimmered into being, its landing throwing vast clouds of lunar soil into expanding plumes. It surrounded and contained the Doctor and TARDIS. St. Christopher's Church had arrived on the moon. To Trelaw and the Hutchingses, it seemed as if the Doctor and a police box had suddenly appeared in the aisle of the church, while a comatose woman had materialised across the altar. Emily shrieked, then put a hand over her mouth. The Doctor simply nodded to Trelaw and sat down on a pew, thinking. "Doctor!" blurted the Reverend Amaze. "What are you doing here?" Saving the world. You're on the moon. A creature called the Timewyrms used some powerful source of psychic energy to bring you here. Don't ask why. Now, let me think. So he sat and thought, gazing intently into the distance. Every now and then he dabbed at the wound on his cheek. Peter Hutchins looked out of the window and saw lunar craters. Then he looked at Ace, then at the doctor. He raised a finger to ask a question. "Don't, love," advised his wife. "Let me." She sat down beside the Time Lord and poked him in the sleeve. "Hey, that's not good enough. We want some answers." "Do you really?" The doctor looked up at her. "You won't like them. I'm the doctor, and this," he gestured to the prone form at the other end of the aisle, "is my friend Ace." "Doctor," Saul muttered uneasily, "your friend is registering no brain activity. She is, forgive me, dead." "Not yet," muttered the Time Lord. "Not while I'm still alive." Hemmings wasn't Hemmings. He was a wave peak, a slight difference in an ocean of senseless chaos. He was pushed and pulled towards every strong concept, crashing against ranting emotion, scrabbling away from mongrel dogma and perverted concepts. Only a sense of what he wasn't defined him, stopped him from being absorbed into the sea of data. He wasn't a lefty or a darky or a queer. He wasn't... The sea kept changing and he kept arguing himself alive. He was never asked what he actually was. Beside him swam others, the obvious others, spiked and chattering, devils he had once drawn in a picture and then painted over with Aryan angels. Ahead a gate was opening, and he could feel the first thorns piercing his flesh as velvet hands pressed a rose to his brow. This wasn't what he thought he believed. He thought he believed in a glorious wartime heaven, legions of bright cavalry gloriously battling and feasting. That was what his father had taught him. But his father had silenced his mother, and she had quietly believed in something else, clutching her rosary nervously as Rupert had delighted at every German victory. His mother had known what her son believed underneath, what woke him every time he heard a sob at night from the cells. Hell is where torturers go to be tortured. Ace felt leather against her cheek. She opened her eyes and looked around. Huh? Now this ought to be the inn again, right? It wasn't. She was laying on an ornate leather settee, a cushion having slipped out from under her head. Beside the settee, a small table carried a pile of old magazines, including a couple of decaying comics. Sunlight was shining in through a bay window that led onto a small lawn. It was, according to a calendar, 20th of August. Various ordinary people were sitting around in chairs or chatting quietly. A big bronze bell sat on a desk, behind which a cheery nurse was writing in a large book. Oh, right. Another option. So, this was like nothing had ever happened, right? Like she'd never got picked up in that time storm, never met the professor, never flirted with the idea of joining Kane's mercenaries. She sat up and stretched. Well, maybe if she got out of here, she could impress the gang, having been a loony. Hey, Midge was still alive. This got better every minute. She swung her legs experimentally, wondering just where she was supposed to be. Looked expensive for her family. Not that they'd have cared. She still had a vague sense of having done something terrible. In a moment's ecstasy, she had glimpsed a blazing corpse vanishing into the white out of an atomic blast. Hell of a dream. Ace hoped that the image would fade, but she had a terrible intuition that it was real, that her actions had resulted in deaths, vast numbers of deaths. That was, perhaps, why she was in one of the last places in the universe that she wanted to be. There's no place like home, thank God. The nurse looked up and smiled, closed her book, and came over. You must be the new arrival. Sleep well? Oh, yeah, Ace grinned. I've really got my head together now. This is Perivale, right? Yes, smiled the matron, pleased. And it's 1987, right? Why, yes, laughed the matron. Crap, grinned Ace, standing up and ruffling her hair. Go on, give us the hard sell. That's a bad attitude to take if you want to get well, sighed the nurse. If I could have a few personal statistics. She picked up a clipboard and pen. Blood group? I'm an O. Why do you want to know? Oh, it's just so we can match you to the correct vampire. Yeah, right. Ace nodded. I could see that one coming. Hell, right? Do you have any preferences? Stoning, burning, or crucifixion? The nurse smiled brightly, licking her lips. The whole waiting room turned round and looked at Ace as if she was the victim of a vast practical joke. Ace closed her eyes for a long moment and thought about what heaven would have been like. Heaven would have involved beautiful adventures, running with wild horses, and having her toes sucked by Ian Brown. How does this schedule strike you? We start at lunchtime with skinning alive, then you get the aforementioned vampire, the circus of biologically curious clowns, then tea. Ace did her best not to listen. She wanted to say something apt and cool, but her stomach was bulging with nausea, and sheer animal terror was welling up inside her in waves. No way was she going to cry. If this was hell, then she'd take it on, fight it out, try and turn it into something good. But she still was probably going to throw up first. It was a good thing then, for hell's carpeting at least, that at that moment the outer door to the waiting room flew open. Ace spun around, ready for a fight, but the new arrival didn't even notice her. It was Hemmings, being dragged by the arms by two giggling monsters. They were heading for an inner door, and he was screaming mindless prayers and shouting to his mother. But he wasn't resisting. The nurse laughed. Being dissected isn't really all that bad, Mr. Hemmings. It can be a very interesting experience. The other door slammed shut behind him, leaving a vague smell of brimstone. Ace gritted her teeth and looked up at the nurse. Nah, she said, this can't be hell. I assure you that it is. What makes you so certain? Well, if you really wanted to torture me, you'd need something else. And what's that? Pericomo. The girl from Perivale reached into her pocket and slipped on her mirror shades. Do your worst. I'm not scared. The nurse frowned. Some people were not taking eternal damnation as seriously as they might. She isn't frightened. A laughing voice rang out across the room, and Ace felt the feeling of tension return to her stomach. God, that was a voice from a long time ago. It couldn't be. Chad Boyle stood up from the chair he had been lounging in, throwing aside a shooting magazine. He grinned his demented grin at Ace. I told you there was no way you could get away from me, Dotty. We're going to play. Don't you get it yet, stupid? Hell isn't demons and toasting forks. Hell is other people. Ace was almost glad to feel the tears on her cheeks.